And welcome back after what seems like an absolute age. Yes, the F1 show is finally returning. My name is Ross McIntyre and I'm joined, as always, by the lovely Connor Jackson. Connor, it's been a long time, my friend. How are you doing?
It has been longer than it should have been. As you say, it's been such a while, but I'm glad we're back. I'm glad we're on point again for another F1 show. And my gosh, what a race to come back to, eh? This was certainly an entertaining Brazilian Grand Prix.
Oh, it certainly was. There was plenty to discuss. We saw drama, we saw sprint races, we saw disqualifications and penalties galore, and a healthy dosing of controversy on top of it. So why don't we just kick it off? Well, we all should. Let's discuss the race winner, ye old 7-time world champion Sir Lewis Hamilton. OB, I think it is. I don't know. It doesn't really matter anymore. But Lewis Hamilton. What a drive, what a performance, and what a needed performance as well. Obviously, Hamilton won the 2021 or Sao Paulo Grand Prix. It was actually called the Brazilian Grand Prix to you and I, after being disqualified from qualifying for the event for his rear wing, for his DRS, breaking essentially the rear wing DRS measurements by 0.2 of a millimetre. Luckily for him, this was a sprint weekend. It was another sprint weekend, so he was able to work his way up to 5th in the sprint race, which meant he started 10th in the race proper because he had a 5-place grid penalty due to an internal combustion engine change, and he was able to charge through in the race and take a very, very phenomenal win. What a drive he sent, and Connor, we thought about this beforehand, but was this potentially Hamilton's greatest ever performance? Especially when you consider he basically had to overcome a 25-place grid penalty, had to overtake absolutely everyone, and had to overtake Max Verstappen, who was not going to let him past, if he could at all. It was a brilliant drive.
Indeed. I'm not going to deny at all that this was a fantastic Hamilton driver and certainly one of his best wins. Although, as you say, it's one of those, can we consider this the best win of his career? Was this, the defining moment of his tenure? We have obviously seen some fantastic races in the past from him. A lot of people will remember the 2008 British Grand Prix in which he beat half the field by a minute and a half. Some will also remember more recently the 2020 Turkish Grand Prix, where he won his seventh title. Was a fantastic drive from him in the rain in a car that was effectively underperforming that whole weekend, even in qualifying. He just made the most of the conditions as everyone else fell away, even Verstappen that day. Talking of Verstappen, obviously you've also got other occasions like the Monaco Grand Prix 2019, where Hamilton, on the wrong tyres, let's say, for that race, basically held off Max for a good 20 laps, including many lunges down at the hairpin. So I don't know. Is this the greatest performance of Hamilton's career? Not entirely sure, but absolutely it is one of his best drives. There's, effectively a 25 position gain over the course of the weekend thanks to this new sprint race format. In fairness, the one thing that I think the sprint race did prove, and Ross, I'm curious what you think about this, is just how easily it is for the front runners, and in particular the Mercedes, to get past other cars. Now, I know the Brazilian Grand Prix is relatively easy to overtake on. The Sao Paulo track is relatively wide. There's good, undulating flows of the corners that does allow for good DRS overtakes. However, we saw him in a, was it 24-lap race, wasn't it, for the sprint race, overtake 15 cars. Now, do you think that's a little ridiculous? The fact that the leader can get past so many cars so quickly. And, it's not like he was on a dramatically different strategy. Everyone was on the same tyres, same fuel loads. It's not like, back in the day where someone would just run on fumes and see how long they could go before a pit stop type thing. But yeah, I think it's a little intriguing how quickly Hamilton managed to make its way up through the order.
Well, again, I'm not a fan of the sprint race format. I don't think it's the right direction for F1 to move. And again, this was the perfect example of why not, because we were essentially robbed of Hamilton having to do all of that in the race proper. Instead, he got an extra 20 laps to essentially get himself up to 5th place and then start from 10th from the grid in the race. It was, again, as you said, a phenomenal performance. Yeah, it was interesting. I guess just how easy it was. Almost, I don't think it was easy for him to do it. When you stick one of the greatest to ever step in a racing car, in one of the fastest. Well, last year was arguably the fastest car that's ever been in Formula One. This year, it's one of the front runners, a championship contender, and at a track where historically said one of the greatest to ever step foot in a racing car is very, very fast. There's won lots of races there. It's going to be a recipe for success. That's what we saw. And as well, Hamilton he was driving angry. Obviously wasn't impressed with, what had happened that weekend with the penalty from the engine alone. That's obviously not going to unset you. And then the disqualification from qualifying as well. It was evident he was driving.
Sometimes, mate, it's the being angry that gets you going, though. It's
exactly.
The fire in your lungs that,
that's what I was about to say, because, every time you can tell Hamilton's angry, he drives a phenomenal. Think back to Silverstone earlier this year. He was obviously not entirely happy after he got given that penalty from the incident with Verstappen at Copse. He thought it was just a racing incident and proceeds to just blitz through the entire field to take what is a brilliant, if controversial, win. And again, that's what we saw. We saw an angry Hamilton just absolutely flying, and it was amazing to see. I'm one of Hamilton's biggest critics, and even then I was sat there just going, this is unbelievable what I'm watching as the driver of a great. It's a shame we've not got Josh Harrison here, because obviously he'd be singing his praises all show long. But it's a phenomenal drive. But yeah, what you said, it's interesting, and hopefully something the new regulations will change is separate that gap, because we know that the faster cars are so much faster than everything else this season. We know that the Mercedes and the Red Bulls are just a cut above from the Ferraris, the McLarens, the Aston Martins, the AlphaTauris. They're just up the road essentially. And that's hopefully something the new regulations will bring in next year. Obviously, we can never tell until, well, not even until testing, until basically we get to qualifying in Australia, because up until that point it's all really a guessing game. Are they actually pushing? Are they trying to show off? Are they going flat out with the best team, is sandbagging? The only instance where everyone knew that a car was going to rock up and win was 2009, because Brawn turned up in testing and even was sandbagging, they were half a second up the road on everyone else. So yeah, it's interesting, to see just how, I wouldn't say Hamilton was dominant in Brazil, because you aren't really dominant when, you're fighting your way through, but it was a phenomenal comeback drive, I think, I would say. And as I said, really a driver of a great, and again, something that, for me was just utterly awe-inspiring.
I think the biggest concern I had was what would have happened if it started at the front. If we hadn't been robbed, his rear wing had met the regulations or whatever, and we had that sprint race, then we had the race, how much up the road would he have been? Because he caught up, as you say, the first couple of positions in the race proper pretty quickly, which is perhaps what we expected. But even getting past the more tricky drivers, the Ferraris or whatever, there was no real issue. His only real problem came in passing Perez, in which Perez managed to overtake him back on the straight. But even that only took, a lap or two before he was eventually through. And then eventually got up to Verstappen. You had the whole Verstappen incident, which we'll get to in a bit. But after that, he went on and dominated and won the race by a good 15 seconds in the end. For a driver that started 10th, how much would he have won if he'd been at the front? And I think that's the other point I want to make, which is Hungary this year. Hamilton, the team made a mistake that race. I think that's fair to say. There was a bad screw up at the start, and as a result, he was on the wrong tyre and yada, yada, yada. That was another race where he was charging through the order. It was a race where he knew he needed to maximise the points because Max was not going to be getting those points. And yet, we didn't see a dominant performance of him through the field. He rose, absolutely, but we all remember him getting stuck behind Fernando in those closing laps, and how amazing Alonso did in defending, which was credit to Alonso. But would the Hamilton of Brazil, would Alonso stood a chance against the Hamilton of Brazil, I should say, in the sense of how good is this engine? Because I think that's the other thing that's effectively been hidden by this weekend, which is, if this is how good the Mercedes engine is at a track that we expected Red Bull to dominate, what are we going to go into when we reach Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi for the last 3 Grand Prix? Is this the turning point in the championship? Is this where we go, Hamilton is the eight times champion? Because there's no way that the Red Bulls can come back from half a second for what was a 0.4 second deficit around the Brazil circuit. That's going to be at least half seconds, 0.6 per second by the time we reach Qatar, which is a circuit 1/3 longer. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be very interesting about what that engine does over the next 3 races.
Yeah, I mean, obviously these next 3 races are, they're arguably some of the most tense, some of the most crucial races we're ever going to see in a Formula One World Championship year. Personally, I think how quick Hamilton was is partly due to, I think Mercedes actually just got it right this weekend. I think obviously the engine was a big help. Supposedly, having a fresh ICE in the car gives an extra 36 horsepower for the Mercedes cars, which is that's quite a lot. And it appears that Mercedes have now realised that just chucking a new engine in the back of a car and taking the penalty is a very, very viable strategy if your car's just a rocket ship in a straight line. But I think, we were all expecting Red Bull to be on top in Brazil. The last couple of years they have been. Hamilton only really won in 2018 because of that incident between Verstappen and Ocon, the lapping incident, which seems like a million years ago now. But I think Mercedes did actually just get this one right. I think they just obviously got the car in the optimum setup zone. If you watch Hamilton's onboards, especially in the sprint race, you can tell he's pushing really, really hard. And the car does step out a couple of times with him, but overall it just looks so solid and so fast. And as well, Hamilton, he was driving smart as well, especially in the sprint race. He figured out that if you could just hang back, through the big left-hand leg before you come onto the main straight, even though it's a bit bendy, then you can get that DRS, you can get a huge boost and fire past. It was Hamilton using his brain as well. And as well, I think we have to factor in that Hungary is a track that is notoriously hard to overtake, and Sao Paulo is a track that is relatively easy to overtake with these modern regulations that with all the dirty air and the downforce and whatnot. So it's that being said, and also in that race as well, Alonso's defensive performance was one of the best we've seen in a Formula One race for a long time. It was absolutely stoic. Alonso was just not letting Lewis through. I mean, we talk about great. Max put up a pretty solid defensive performance for a few laps here in Brazil. Perez did a really good defensive performance here, but Alonso in Hungary was just on another planet. Again, the guy's a 2-time world champion. He's obviously no slouch, but to defend against a charging 7-time world champion and as Mercedes was it was quite some performance. But it would have been interesting. Hamilton, I think, this weekend was just on another level. Again, driving angry, new engine in the car, has a point to prove, needs to get this points to keep his championship hopes alive. The car was good. He was phenomenal. I think it was a combination for success. Had a track he likes as well. So I think it was a combination for success, and he did a great job. But it's interesting what you say. Hungary, could he have run any better at Hungary? We know the team made a mistake. Alonso definitely cost Hamilton that win. We know that Hamilton had the pace to win, were it not for Alonso's defensive driving. He didn't get it. Ocon ended up winning that race, taking his maiden Grand Prix victory for Alpine. So, would it, if Hamilton, maybe had some of that, fury that he had here in Brazil. Obviously, he was, annoyed with the team. He clearly wasn't, happy with them at the Hungarian. The team had a very, very grave strategy call. Just did not work out the way they thought it would. Just totally did not go their way. But
I think the thing you've got to remember about Hungary, mate, is that while in Brazil, he's catching Red Bulls, as it were. In Hungary, he was catching the Alpines.
That is true.
None of the big teams were in the Hungarian Grand Prix. There was, there was no big drivers. I think the closest we had was like Carlos Sainz running in third to front-running drivers. Even then, the Ferraris weren't particularly on the pace that weekend, if I remember correctly. Exactly. Leclerc was out, McLarens were out, Red Bulls were out, his teammate was out. That was it. It was Hamilton on his own. There was no way he should have lost that race. But there you go.
Well, it's very interesting to see. I mean, either way, still a phenomenal performance from the 7-time world champion, and one that has, well, in fact, almost blown the championship wide open once again, because at a weekend we were expecting Red Bull and Verstappen to come in and dominate. Well, it actually got flipped on its head, and now it's advantage Hamilton, it would seem, heading into the final 3 rounds of the championship, of course. What do you think about this? Do you think it's now advantage Hamilton? Do you think it was a fluke win, or did Mercedes just get it right? Do not be afraid to get in touch at Motorsport Radio on all good social media platforms. But now it's time to talk about the other man in this championship fight, Max Verstappen. Of course, the Dutchman did what he could, but was just no match this weekend for the absolute might of Hamilton and the Mercedes. However, there was a lot of controversy this weekend. First of all, for the €50,000 fine he got slapped with, which I'm not even going to get into. It was total rubbish anyway. Second of all, it was obviously just to, we've given Hamilton a penalty. We've got to give Max a penalty as well. We're not going to touch on that. If we have time at the end, we might come back. But the thing that I want to talk about is Verstappen's defensive driving. Down into turn 4, Verstappen has Hamilton on the outside on Hamilton's first real overtake attempt. And funnily enough, neither of them make the corner. Both of them just go straight on, have to use the runoff. They don't touch this time for a change. But both of them go straight on. And there was a big debate over whether it was a penalty or not for Verstappen for illegal defending, essentially. At the time, race director Michael Massey said it wasn't a penalty, then said they didn't have all the evidence available post-race, and then said that on hindsight it definitely was a penalty. And then the FIA released Verstappen's onboard today. You can go and watch it. It'll be on the F1 YouTube channel, I presume, or something along those lines. And he just does not make he doesn't even turn into the corner, which, I think we're all expected to see. I think if I can mime it with my hands, he comes in and essentially just does this and then does this at the exit. He was never making it, shall we say. And now Mercedes, with this new evidence, have now actually lodged an appeal against the decision and are trying to get Verstappen penalised. So it's turning into a bit of a political point scoring system here. So that'll be interesting to see what comes out of that, as Mercedes and Red Bull once again at loggerheads with the stewards and with each other, and trying to settle the world championship away from the racetrack. However, the question is was Verstappen actually out of line here, and did he deserve a penalty? Again, Michael Massey said, in hindsight, actually it was a penalty, and he's race director. He's the guy. Well, he's not calling the shots. He doesn't actually call these shots, but he's the one who's overviewing the entire race. Personally, for me, not a penalty at all. We've seen that it is. Karun Chandok put a tweet out earlier which summed it up perfectly. And he said that it is a defensive move that any good driver has pulled off in their career at least once. You just run your rival out of road. When I was, doing a bit of karting back when I was a wee little kid, younger than I am even now, the first thing that my dad taught me was, I know, it's crazy, isn't it? I used to be younger than I already am. The first thing my dad taught me was that if there's someone in front of you or someone behind you and you just need to get them out of the way, just shove them off the racetrack, because you've just got to do it. You've just got to do it. You might get a penalty, especially if they're in front. You just got to take. Don't put them in a wall. Just force them off the racetrack.
I can tell why you haven't come away from the kart track with any friends.
It's come down from a father, from above. Okay, but it is just a classic defensive move. Just run your rival out of road. Was this more actually, pushing Hamilton off than running him out of road this time? We've seen this happen before. Imola earlier this year.
They did touch.
They didn't touch at Imola this year either. Actually, did they? No, they did bang wheels.
They went over each other, mate.
Yeah, they banged wheels at Imola, yeah. But, this time they didn't touch at all, which is impressive. But they banged wheels at Imola, and Hamilton did have to go over the rumble strips over the curb for the second part of Tamburello. Verstappen, pushed him off the racetrack. This time, though, it was fully just I am not making this corner. Lewis, I think, anticipated this. Because if you watch Lewis's onboard, I think this is the initial reason why they didn't give the penalties, because Lewis doesn't turn in either and keeps his foot in. What do you think, Connor? It's an interesting discussion. So,
it's just I'm happy to rest eventually on the bygones be bygones type argument. However, I will sort of rein you in slightly in the sense of you can't just go straight on at a corner. If we're talking about Hamilton, you might remember back 16 Austrian Grand Prix against Nico Rosberg.
That one.
Exactly. Closing laps, in which Rosberg was ahead, Hamilton was charging, and he decided to go around the outside of Nico, and Nico, doing what Nico does, ran him out of road, and by straight up not turning into the corner. Now, that resulted back then, all those years ago, in a penalty. It also resulted in the loss of Rosberg's front wing and a lot of damage and a lot of political upheaval. And it was one of the flashpoints of that year's, exciting championship battle. But there is at least a small precedent there that goes, if you're going to try and run your rival out of room, you must at least try to make the majority of the corner. And as I think you politely put it, Verstappen didn't turn the wheel enough to even make the corner himself. Saying that, as you say, do I really want this championship to be decided in the courtrooms? Not really. I remember a couple of years back, 2012, the end of the season, after Vettel won his third title. There was basically an appeal by Ferrari after the season that said Vettel had run through yellow flags and had overtaken a back marker or whatever, which obviously was illegal and would have earned him a time penalty and thus would have dropped him in position, yada yada. Alonso would have won the championship, was the basic point of that. And I remember that basically taking a bit of a shine off the third championship, because we'd had this amazing championship fight all season between Alonso let's be honest, was a much slower Ferrari, and Vettel in the Red Bull. And it went all the way to the season finale. Vettel spun, dramatically after being hit at turn four. Yes, I don't even know the name of that corner. I just know it's turn 4, but
it's something in Portuguese. I'm not particularly strong on the South.
Yeah, exactly. Fair, so. But yeah, he got spun around at that corner and spent the rest of the race, charging his way up. And rain came, and then he dropped back down and went back up because of rain-affected conditions. Fantastic race. Point being, that was politically decided after the Grand Prix. We had that celebration, but it was mired in the weeks after, and as a result, we never. I think that soured Alonso and the Ferrari team for a lot of people going into 2013. Now, obviously, this is a very subjective opinion, but there's an awful lot of brand image that can be that can come away from the season very negatively. And while it's all very fun in the middle part of the season, Red Bull and Mercedes, politically going at each other and forcing each other to have penalties and investigations, by the time we reach this end of the season area, I don't want it to go to the courtrooms. I don't want to go to Abu Dhabi and think, oh, well, Verstappen's got 2 court cases next week and Hamilton's got a court case after that. And maybe one of them might decide it. Maybe it won't be. Who knows? And it just becomes a provisional championship. And I would hate the championship to be decided provisionally because of courtroom drama. This all needs to be decided on track. And if that means letting them get away with wheel-to-wheel action that would perhaps be bordering on the edge of extreme for the case of the championship battle, I think the FIA must look at that, and I think they are looking at that and giving it some leeway. But of course, this does create the obvious problem of one rule for him, one rule for everyone else, which is, it's fine, them two, they can bang wheels once, it's okay, we'll let them get away with it, it's good for the TV. And then I don't know, Ocon and Gasly touch each other later in the race, something completely unimportant. And we're going to hand out penalty for Gasly for doing X, Y, Z. And that sort of inconsistency with the penalties does create a lot more friction, because at that point you don't know where the limit is. They're just racing. Well, what is the limit of they're just racing? And because there's an inconsistent line of they're just racing, both of them are pushing it to the limit. And Sao Paulo being another good example of how long do we push the boat out before something has to be said. But yeah, this appeal process is interesting, and I think it's Mercedes' way of effectively trying to neutralize what Red Bull will probably do in the coming weeks about the about whatever rear wing issue that Verstappen supposedly found out in that €50,000 fine, something about DRS flexing or whatever. Or if I'm right in saying it was that during the middle of the straight, He found that the Mercedes wing was bending down in the middle of the straight to give basically the Mercedes more downforce in a straight line compared to the Red Bull design. I'll have to look into my technical analysis on that. But yeah, the point being, Red Bull will protest Mercedes wing in rounds to come. And so I think Mercedes are trying to get in there early and going, we're going to protest Red Bull for this incident in a sort of, well, even if we can't prove it, we could maybe, level it out so their protest becomes null to our protest type issue. So we will see, Ross. I'm not so certain that this is all over, and I just really want it to be decided on track. I don't want it to go to the stewards.
I mean, we've already seen one world championship in the GT Pro class, and the World Endurance Championship did go to the International Court of Appeal because Porsche were trying to claim that they'd wrongfully been had their title removed after they essentially they claimed they were punted off by a Ferrari in the last 10 minutes. In the end, they did drop their case, and was it the AF Corsa Ferrari? I think I can't remember the top of my head. Did end up taking that title after a very, very controversial incident with like 10 minutes to go in the season. I don't want to see another one. I find it frustrating how the most prestigious motorsport series in the world can't have a good like the first proper inter-team championship fight since 2012 without there just being a political mess off to the side of it. That just really gets on my nerves. But that's Formula One. It's the most political sport in the world. And it is interesting. I mean, again, personally, it's not a penalty. I mean, I think a great example is the penalty that Vettel got in Canada 2019 for this. If you remember correctly, he went off at one of the chicanes, came back on and squeezed Hamilton against the wall when he came back on, ended up getting a 5-second penalty, and he won on the road. But
that was rubbish. I'll put that down now and say that was an absolutely rubbish.
I mean, so do I, but I kind of think I know the reason why they gave it. And you get the famous image of him swapping the finishing boards after the race as well, which is a brilliant photo. But yeah, it's the I think, again, I'm not a steward, I don't really know, but I think the reason they gave that penalty is because Hamilton had to back off in that scenario. The official reason they said is because they'd seen the data in the steering wheel, and they supposedly said that he turned slightly to the right when he came back on the racetrack. But use your brain, he's literally just trying to catch the car from sliding into the wall. I think the official is just because when he came on, Hamilton was there, and Hamilton had to back off to avoid an incident. So I think that's why they gave a penalty, because it actually cost Lewis time, as well as there nearly being an accident. In this scenario, there was never going to be an accident because Hamilton obviously saw it coming a million miles off. He didn't even try and make the corner either. And as well, Hamilton kept his foot in. He just went the long way around, just used the momentum to try and get back at him in the next corner. I would be surprised and incredibly frustrated if Hamilton got a penalty for that. Verstappen got a penalty for that. Apologies, especially seeing as how Lewis won the race. I think Mercedes need to stop complaining. You got.
You think Mercedes need to stop complaining?
Red Bull needs to stop complaining as well. But I get that Mercedes had a bad weekend. They get the grid penalty for the engine. Fair enough. They get disqualified for what is a minuscule rule break, but still a rule break. Was that harsh? Yes, it was harsh, but it was fair. That's how it is in my eyes. And then Hamilton put on a phenomenal performance and won the race. So just please shut up and we can all carry on and go home. But at the end of the day, you're always going to try and one up your opponents, and especially with Mercedes now chasing. Are they chasing Red Bull? Hamilton's definitely chasing the drivers.
Mercedes are ahead of Red Bull. It's only Hamilton that's behind Verstappen.
Well, Drivers' Championship gets you the brand earnings, I suppose, and the PR money.
The Team Championship gets you the money, though.
Yeah, the Team Championship gets you the money, but it's the PR stuff. So one on the driver's side of things, isn't it? That's where the real merchandise is made.
Oh, it's an article I'll release later in the week, actually, about would Red Bull sacrifice the constructors to help Verstappen win the drivers? How much? Supposedly,
Helmut Marko said yes behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So, who knows? Again, personally, no way it was a penalty for Verstappen. It was aggressive defending. Was it legal? Probably not. But has everyone done it, including Lewis Hamilton? Yes. They didn't touch. Hamilton didn't back off. He didn't lose any time. He still won the race. So, I don't even know why Mercedes are trying to appeal it, to be honest. I mean, again, they're just obviously trying to one-up Red Bull. And as you said, this is just going to keep getting worse over the last 3 rounds of the season. I mean, Jeddah especially. Qatar we've never been to. It's wide, lots of runoff. Very high chance for it there. Jeddah, I think, is just going to be a mess. I know, we'll touch on Oscar Piastri in a second, actually, but I was speaking with Oscar Piastri the other day, and he said he'd been on the Alpine sim at Jeddah. He did a few laps and said it's way too fast and the walls are way too narrow and there's going to be red flags and safety cars. So, that's something to look for. Is Jeddah this weekend? It is.
No, it's Qatar this weekend, and then it's Jeddah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, all right. We kind of forgot we weren't doing a Qatar review. I mean, I'm not actually going to be able to watch the live race anyway. I'll just watch the Channel 4 highlights. Be here same time next week. Qatar review, because we forgot to do a preview, and besides, we've never been there before. It's a motorbike track. It's gonna be.
Yes, motorbikes. Hey,
that's our thing. Hello, motorbikes. That's our thing. Motorsport radio, motorbikes. But this is the F1 show. We're not here to talk about bikes. We're here to talk about cars. Jeddah will be a nightmare. Abu Dhabi as well, with the slightly new layout, will be painful. And honestly, at this point, with Mercedes realizing that they can just use a tactic of throw a new engine in the car and go down the straight fast, this is gonna be a very, very messy end to the World Championship. Don't get me wrong, it's been a brilliant season. But boy, oh boy, is it going to be a season that we look back on and just go, oh my dear Lord, what were you lot doing? Again, what do you think? Do you think Verstappen deserves a penalty? Do you think, are you loving all the political nightmare to the side? Do get in contact with us over at Motorsport Radio on all good social media platforms. Now it is time to talk about the photo behind me and Oscar Piastri and Guan Yu Zhou and Antonio Giovinazzi, because this morning Alpine announced that F2 leader, reigning F3 champion and looking to win 3 junior series on the trot, driver Oscar Piastri will be their official reserve driver for 2022, and one presumes if Alonso does not stay for 2023 that he'll be given a race seat. It was also announced about an hour later now Antonio Giovinazzi is no longer to be with Alfa Romeo. He is not a part of the Alfa Romeo team for 2022, and that will just open the way for the worst kept secret in Formula 1 at the moment, and that is Guan Yu Zhou, or Gunyao Zhu, I think is the proper pronunciation. Apologies to anyone who's listening who speaks Mandarin. Is going to be the first Chinese Formula 1 driver and racing alongside Valtteri Bottas in the 2022 season over at Alfa Romeo. Now, first of all, this is great for Zhu and for Piastri. It's been more tough recently than ever for young drivers to break into the sport. Piastri's technically not in a race seat, but it's inevitable that he will get one surely. There was I can't remember the name of the bloke who runs it, but the guy who runs the F1 feeder series Twitter news account, which is top quality news source, quote unquote said it was a crime if Piastri never makes it. So Zhu is very, very highly rated young driver who's been in Formula 2 for quite a while now, so about time he made it as well. So great to see them going in. What does it mean for the future, especially with Zhu being a Chinese driver? That's the main focus. He's the first Chinese Formula 1 driver. What does that mean for the sport in real terms?
I think it said something when it wasn't just Alfa Romeo that were coming out and going, oh yes, we're very happy to have Zhu or whatever in the team, but Formula 1 themselves sort of made the assumption and made the statement that they were happy to have Zhu on board. They in discussions in backrooms, according to the race, there was there's discussions ongoing for a second Chinese Grand Prix, and that hinges on Guan Yu Zhou having a race seat, in the sense of either some of the F1 bosses have supposedly virtually promised him a race seat for 2023, whether it's at Alfa Romeo or not. And can you imagine this? The idea that not just your team, but the management of the sport you're in values you so much that they will, keep you employed, regardless of, the employer. Imagine if, you did this in the Premier League or whatever. Cristiano Ronaldo will be playing in the Premier League next season. For which team? Who knows? We don't know. But the Premier League will ensure it, that he is, with a team. And And as much as I joke about Ronaldo, it's not even Ronaldo's level, as it were. It's it's a new rookie coming in. It's a new young talent. So that shows you, I think, how much value that this has for the Chinese market, and how much F1 values this, this potential new revenue stream. We have seen, drivers from different countries come in before and boost their own country's reputation. Some of you remember Rio Haryanto a couple of years ago from Indonesia, although it's worth noting that the race after Haryanto was dropped from the Manor team because he didn't have enough money, basically. Indonesia stopped playing F1 races live on TV the race after. Which was, I think, said a lot for how much Indonesia actually cared for the sport. But it's the same with a lot of other countries. I mean, we've seen India, basically rise and fall in terms of its F1 involvement from Karan Chandok, Narain Karthikeyan, and then the Indian Grand Prix, only to fall away and become obscure again, basically. South Korea as well. There's another example there with the Grand Prix. But yeah, there's plenty of nations, I think, who have been involved in Formula One, but only because their driver is there. What you want is a long, sustained involvement in Formula One, in the same way that America is now invested in the sport, regardless of the fact there is an American driver or not. And to be honest, mostly regardless of whether there's an American team or not. But there is F1 fan engagement in America, and there's excitement about the American Grand Prix from locals that are there. But how many Chinese drivers, Chinese fans go to the Chinese Grand Prix and are excited to see Formula One as a concept? And I like to think that's more people in recent years. But is it enough to justify having 2 Chinese races? Is it enough to justify Formula One putting a load of money into the Chinese market, and now for Romeo putting a load of money into maybe their Chinese road car market, for example? That's again, with a growing middle class in China, that's again another thing to look at. But that's very political. I won't get too involved in that. But yeah, Zhou as a brand absolutely is big for the sport. But you are right about noting Piastri first, though, which is, it's as the purist always says, it's F1 should be the best of the best, and we have seen another example of someone who is very good but not quite the best making it to F1 over someone who's perhaps maybe a little better. And if it's just one-off drivers, you can sometimes understand this, but we're starting to see this more in recent years. I mean, we had Mazepin this year, we'll have Zhou next year. Year before this, we had Latifi, and obviously we've had Stroll in previous years. All drivers who, were assisted, let's say, to Formula One through their connections and their monetary involvement. And while they are not bad drivers, all of them have their own relative success. They are drivers who perhaps would have fallen by the wayside if they hadn't have had that support behind them. Latifi notably never won a race in junior Formula up until his final season of Formula 2. His previous single-seater win came in, I think it was Formula Pilota China, back in like 5 years previously. It was ridiculous how long Latifi went between wins. Mazepin, his only single-seater win prior to Formula 2, ironically came in British F3 during one of their reverse races. I remember I was there that day. Mazepin, again, another one who never really showed any promise until he reached that GP3 and that runner-up in GP3 he did that 1 year, which got him the super license points, for reference. We're starting to see the grid fill up, especially at the back end now, with drivers who are there to help financially assist the team. And while obviously, again, this is nothing new in Formula One, nothing new at all, but it's more than 1 or 2 now. It's becoming slightly insipid, the amount of drivers we have and at the lower echelons, basically making up the numbers. And it is starting to restrict the numbers of talented people coming into the grid, not just kind of talented people. I'm thinking like Nick de Vries, Formula 2 champion a couple of years back, but people who have consistently won championships in the same way we've got Piastri this year. He's being denied effectively for what? Sort of thing. For what? Esteban Ocon? I mean, basically. So yeah, it's always a case of there'll always be favoritism from drivers in Formula One as opposed to out of Formula One. There's it's a big risk in taking on a rookie type thing, but there's a reason why Red Bull ex-Red Bull drivers appear to permeate the whole grid because they're so they overrun their drivers so much, they're so trigger happy with firing them, that it creates a load of drivers who are at least middling in ability and know their place effectively in the Formula One circuits, and don't just get whittled away to whatever sports car series or IndyCar happens to be next on the open availability slot. I mean, if you want me to be really harsh, look at Nico Hulkenberg. Like, did he really deserve to be in Formula One all those years? Those last couple seasons, was he really there contributing? Even Antonio Giovinazzi this season, like, he's been okay, but he's not a young up and coming driver anymore. He's not the hot young talent, and people, I think sometimes they do need to. The teams need to understand that unless you've got a really good young driver coming through your order, you can't just hang on to middling people just because they're established with the team, because there's a lot of potential you could be wasting, as it were. But hey ho, that's at least one view. I don't know what you think about the potential Joe might have actually in the championship in terms of getting results, though.
I mean, you raise some very, very good points there, Connor. The main one being that motorsport, and especially Formula One, is a rich man's game, and now more than ever. I'm not going to get into drivers' abilities here. The junior drivers, I know I've talked enough about that. Probably get called out for bias because the Piastri photo behind me. I'm lucky enough to have a close connection with Piastri. My father actually manages him along with Mark Webber, so it's I'd probably get called out for bias if I do sing his praises, and I do sing his praises. He is quite good, but is Joe fast enough? Yes, he's quick. Is he F1? I'm not sure, to be honest. We know that he is bringing money. It's being speculated around 20 million. I've heard, inside sources say it's as high as $40 million he's bringing with him. I mean, to put it into perspective, I've heard inside sources saying Mazepin brought $70 million with him, which is just ludicrous. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, at least, Lawrence Stroll bought an entire team, so, could be worse. But yeah, it's great to have a Chinese driver in. Is he good enough or not? Doesn't matter. Chinese driver being in Formula One is massive, massive, massive for the sport. In a period of time where Formula One is going through a growth that it has never seen before. Love or hate Liberty Media, I have many criticisms. You cannot deny that they've completely changed the face of the sport in its marketing and how many people watch it. I mean, obviously, like you said with the Rio Haryanto, example, if your country has a driver doing well or a driver in the sport, automatically interest is going to go up. There's a reason why viewing figures are through the roof in Britain. You've got Lewis Hamilton winning 6 of the last 7 world championships. They've got young talents like Lando Norris who are incredibly popular with the public, becoming public figures, in Britain, In America, owned by an American company, of course, they're going to be trying to push that market, which, the center of capitalism in the world, F1 being the most capitalistic sport in the world without fear of getting too political. Of course, they're going to be trying to go there. There's a reason they're having 2 races the next season. They want the American market to succeed. Why do you think they've done Drive to Survive, which is so obviously a TV show catered for an American market? You don't have to be a genius, to watch Netflix's Drive to Survive to realize that it is, crafted for an American audience, and it's working. Formula One, as of 2020, is the fastest growing sport in the world on social media and in terms of viewing figures. It is, it's unbelievable what Liberty doing in terms of viewing figures, in terms of growth. And one of the, obviously America is their priority, but the next big area they're going to be looking at is China. We've had a Chinese Grand Prix since 2004. Obviously, we haven't the last couple of years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But it's a market that is obviously massive. There's over 1 billion people living in that country. It's the most populous country on earth. I mean, I'm not an economist, but as far as I'm aware, they have the fastest growing economy on the planet. That is a lot of money right there. So to have a Chinese driver in the sport, with a Chinese Grand Prix hopefully returning next year, I mean, I'm not particularly a big fan of the race or the track, but it's good that we have a race there. I'm very much that it's a global sport. Automatically the viewership in China is just going to skyrocket. People who don't care are suddenly going to think, Chinese driver. I mean, it's the same thing. Again, football example. You might not care. The amount of people who probably don't care about football but tuned into the Euro 2020 final because England were in it in this country or Italy were in it in Italy. It's all you have to do is have something that you're related to be involved in something you'll watch it. Just may as well. It's what's going to happen here in China. I could go on and on about China or not Piastri. And again, is it fair that Zhu's going in?
Is there anything fair?
I mean, no. Is anything fair? No. But is it fair that Piastri, who's being touted as one of the hottest up and coming drivers that we've seen in a long, long time, is having to spend a year on the sidelines to Ocon, who I think we all know if you've been watching this show for more than one episode, my opinions on Ocon, and a 40-year-old Fernando Alonso, and Zhou, who's 3 seasons into his F2 campaign and is getting beaten by Piastri, is able to go straight into the Alpha seat. Is that fair? On paper, absolutely not. But Zhou's got money. He's Chinese. From a marketing perspective, he's a PR man's wet dream, frankly. So it's it's kind of what you do. Do you go for the race, which what Alpine seems to be doing, or do you go for the money? And I mean, it's not going to be like Piastri's wasting a year. As far as I'm aware, his contract, he's got 2 guaranteed free practice sessions, or this is what I've heard anyway, from the dad basically, and he's going to get obviously loads of time on a sim. He's going to be doing loads of sim work. He did the sim work for Ocon's Hungarian Grand Prix win, and he's had 3 tests in the RS18 this year. I presume he's going to have a lot more next year as well. So he's going to be getting coached by Alpine all year long. So it's not like he's going to be spending a year on the sidelines. They are going to be crafting and molding him to be perfect. The only concern I really have is if he gets rusty of a race, because he's not actually going to be racing. He's not going to be doing it in a series. Zhu is going to be jumping in against Bottas as well, who is a quick driver. I mean, I know he gets flattened by Lewis Hamilton week in and week out, but Bottas is a quick driver. So it'll be interesting to see how Zhou fares. And again, is it fair? No. Is it the reality of the sport? Absolutely yes. And we've just got to wait and see. But it is good that we have a Chinese driver in the sport finally. Whether Zhou is or is not good enough for F1, it's up to your personal opinion. But he's fighting for an F2 championship. So to be fighting for an F2 championship, you've got to have some degree of talent, surely. One last thing. Oh, sorry, Connor.
No, I was going to say it's the Latifi problem, which is he's good, exactly. he's good, but he's not like
is he F1? Is he
F1? Yeah,
that's the question. I mean, Formula One. That's what I think a lot of casual fans don't realise is just how good a Formula One driver is. We always say they're the best in the world, but I think you have to get like a hands-on experience to realise just how good they are. These guys are the best one, and I mean the best racing drivers in the world, without a shadow of a doubt. To even get into F1, to even get close to F1, is a monumental achievement. To get in and then to win 7 world championships like Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher, that is just you are on to be another level to even win a Grand Prix. So it is and when you consider how the gaps have closed over the years as well, even now with Mercedes and Red Bull up the road, it is a very, very close grid compared to when you look at 1988, for example, when the McLarens were 2 seconds up the road on anything else. So it's a very competitive grid, compared to what it used to be, and the level of talent needed to get in. We bash Latifi, we bash Stroll, we bash Mazepin because they're not good enough, they're paying their way in. Yeah. They might not, not be good enough compared to the rest of the grid. They might have paid their way, but you know what? The fact that they're in an F1 car, and able to, have good races, the fact that they're able to, compete on some weekends is an achievement in itself, because these guys are the best on. Are there more talented people for those seats? Absolutely there are. But at the end of the day, as I start this off with, it's a rich man's game. It's not a fair man's game. And that leads me perfectly onto my final point about it not being a fair game. That's Antonio Giovinazzi, of course, with the news that Joe is going to be joining Valtteri Bottas at Alfa Romeo for 2022. That unfortunately does mean that Antonio Giovinazzi is without a seat for 2022, and that is also the final team on the grid that's been filled up. There are now no seats available. What he does, we don't know. He put up what seems to be quite an optimistic Twitter post afterwards. Of course, I'm sure that he's known for a long time that this was coming.
He's off to Formula E, for reference.
Oh, is he? Is that what the source is saying? That's news to me.
It was announced by Formula E earlier today that he's off.
Was it?
He's off to Dragon Racing. He's alongside Sergio Seti Camera.
I completely. There you go. He's off to Formula E. As the host of this show, that is shocking. I do apologise. I've been so wrapped up in the Joe Piastri thing. I've just completely missed what Giovinazzi's doing. I do apologise. So he's off to Formula E then. There you go. Off to another F1 wasteland. But yeah, I said it. I'm not going to back down.
You're going to get the Victor Fries fans in here trying to rip you off now.
The last question is, is it fair on Giovinazzi? He's a driver who I think it's safe to say has been the quietest in terms of what they've done on track since he's been in the sport.
Yeah, true.
But last year he had the most overtakes in the first lap on every first lap out of everyone across the season, which is everyone presumed why Alfa kept him on. He's okay as a Formula One driver. Again, to make it into Formula One is phenomenal.
But is it fair? It's exactly the point I made earlier, though, which is he's okay, and that's not the point. You don't want a driver that's okay. It's the Hulkenberg problem. How long do you keep an okay driver on your books because it's better that he knows the car than someone who doesn't know the car? As much as it's sad to see Giovinazzi go, and I wish him the best of luck in Formula E. I think he'll probably do quite well over there, but did he deserve to go this year? Yeah, I'll be perfectly honest. He wasn't beating Raikkonen in the same way he was threatening to do last season. That was at least promising for him. But yeah, he's been nowhere near Raikkonen this season. Raikkonen is nowhere near at the height of his career. Alfa have basically lost to Williams this season in the Constructors' Championship. That's not Giovinazzi's fault necessarily, but if they had taken a gamble last year on a rookie and he'd proved to be good, it's you might remember the whole Callum Ilott situation where Mick Schumacher got a lot of hype, a lot of promotion, but Ilott didn't actually get that promotion because if I remember correctly, and Schumacher I don't think actually won Formula 2 in the end, did he? It was Ilott. Was it?
No, Ilott threw it away.
They threw it away, did he?
Yeah, basically, Schumacher did win, but Ilott basically threw that championship away, just making mistakes.
But okay, my apologies. But point being, Ilott was up with Schumacher for most of last season, and it's effectively a similar situation with the Alpine Academy this season, in that it was two Ferrari drivers going head to head for the title. And it's why don't you give the other Ferrari driver a slot, because he's clearly just as talented. But and yeah, he might have been, but again, it's all middling drivers again, which is Ilott better than Giovinazzi? Doesn't matter. The point is he better than half the grid? And that's what you need to measure in the sense of, there's a lot of drivers that come and go. And you really have to be top of the creme de la creme talented to make it. There was a comment I saw on YouTube earlier today, which is, Zhou may not be the 0.01%, but he is the 0.05% of drivers.
And he has $40 million with him as well.
Yes, I'm not going to mention that. In the sense of, you've really got to have special talent, as it were. And maybe that's where these $1 million baby drivers come from, in the sense of they do fill the gap of middling driver while also being good enough to, pay the rest of the team, as it were. There was one more point I'll make, but I have completely forgotten it, so I will come back to it later. So you carry on, Ross.
Think of it quickly, because we're about to wrap up. So just interrupt me if you think of it before the end. Great point about Joe again. Again, I think one thing to consider with Joe, to be fair, is, again, I'm trying not to touch on drivability.
Canadians.
It's hard not to.
That was it. Canadians. I was going to link it all the way back to what I said about Chinese drivers coming to F1 and the marketability and the stuff like that. Well, if you really think that the driver is what makes the market, look at Canada, look at Stroll, look at Latifi. How much are they beloved in Canada? How much is the fan club of the Canadians really that big because those two drivers are in the sport? And maybe some Canadians can prove me wrong, but from what I can tell, there isn't actually a lot of Canadian growth because there are two Canadians in Formula One. This is the most Canadians they've ever had in Formula One at the same time, and they don't care because they're billionaires' kids, basically. They're not representative of what people like, in a sense. It's especially in first world countries. It's fine when you're, a developing nation, I should say, because any representation is good representation. But when you're somewhere like Canada or a lot of the European states, you don't give a toss about, rich kid's kid coming into a sport. And we've seen that with European success stories coming through. They're not beloved by their country. But yes, Ross, thank you for this show. I'm sorry for interrupting your end point.
No, so thanks for interrupting me with your Canadian thing. What I was going to say is, one thing to consider about when you do compare Joe to Ilott, I think that this year of Formula 2 has been the strongest year of like one step below Formula 2/GP2 that we potentially ever had. It is a ridiculously talented grid. I think the grid last year, it was strong, but it was nowhere near as strong as this year. Granted, yes, Joe's been in the car for 3 years, but Ilott was also in the car for 3 years last season. So, Schumacher had been in the car for 2 years last season. Piastri's a rookie. So again, we've already done an F2 show this year. I could spend so much more time talking about it. We don't have that time, but I don't think Joe is bad. Is just the question: is he F1? That's for you to find out in the future, I guess. Find out next year at testing or something.
Not bitter.
I don't know.
Clearly not bitter.
I'm not bitter. What are you talking? Piastri's got a reserve role. I'm happy, all right? The family's happy. His family happy. Everyone's happy. I'm sure Joe's got a real beaming that their boys made F1 as well. Joe's a lovely kid as well. He's a really nice guy. From a personality perspective, he deserves it because he's a lovely guy. Anyway, that is all we've got time for here. Of course, if you've got any other queries, questions, or just want to let us know that we've got everything wrong and we should shut up and all go home, do not be afraid to get in touch at Motorsport Radio on all good social media platforms. But that is it. That's all we've got time for on the triumphant return of the Formula One show. Thank you very much for joining me, Connor. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure.
As always, same to you, Ross. And I hope we can do this again next week. It has been a blast. And of course, Qatar coming up. I do look forward to some motorcycles on four wheels.
Yeah, motorcycles on four wheels. That's a good slogan for the race. Yep, next week, same time, same place. And we're going to be reviewing the time when Formula One decided to go to a MotoGP track. Well, just have to wait until then. See you later.